This is Classical Conversations for the summer of 2025, continuing our exploration of what's happening on the classical music scene nowadays. Today, I'm meeting for the first time Talon Smith, piano virtuoso and composer, on the occasion of his Navona Records debut with some of his own original piano works. Welcome to the program, Talon.
Thanks, Charlie. It's a pleasure. Glad to be here.
Well, my goodness, you've taken up this mantle of pianist composer and really leaned into that in a big way to produce this extraordinary debut album. We're going to get to the details here, but first things first, could you fill us in on some of your earliest music experiences and some of the career milestones along the way?
Yeah, so I started music when I was really young. Actually, my first instrument wasn't the piano, it was the violin. I started when I was 4. And then I began learning the piano at age 5. And now I only play the piano. I think if I tried to hold a violin, my wrist didn't grow right, so it'd have to be like, my elbow would have to be in my side or whatever. But yeah, so I mean, growing up, I listened to a lot of classical music. It was played a lot in my house. And early on, I just really developed a love for that. I think it was there's so much emotional depth and complexity to it that's very stimulating on multiple levels and exciting. It was just excited me at that age. And playing piano, I just enjoyed it. I enjoyed every aspect of it. I enjoyed the way it felt. I enjoyed the way it sounded. It's a good instrument and it's fun to play. And then a few years later, I began more regularly composing. I mean, I improvised for fun, but I started composing more like for real when I was 8. And not that I wrote anything when I was 8 that I would really want anyone in the world to hear, but I started that process and, grew to love that too. I've written mostly for piano. I've done some other projects as well. And debut, the album really is my opus 1 and my opus 2. So the first two things I've published, which are the 24 preludes and the sonata in C minor. So yeah, I mean, does that kind of answer the question?
Absolutely. Well, I'm
Okay.
curious what kind of piano solo repertoire that you have and continue to gravitate to, and do you feel like that repertoire has had any bearing on your compositional approach, particularly in your preludes and the sonata?
Really, I like pretty much everything classical. Obviously, there are some genres or subgenres, I should say, that I gravitate toward more. I've always really loved the romantic output, so Chopin, Liszt, Schumann, all that. I love classical, like classical within classical, Beethoven, Mozart. Baroque is wonderful too. I guess I'm gonna, if I answer this, I'm just gonna say I like them all, aren't I? So I'll just say I like it all. I wouldn't say that my compositional approach is consciously an attempt to recreate any particular style, but I do find that I hear music kind of in a neo-romantic sense. So those harmonies, where it's still melodic, it's still tonal, but it's a little bit more complex. So, and then I enjoy taking like the romantic harmonic language and combining it with more of a modern rhythmic approach. So, taking a piece in C minor but writing it in a fast 5/8, or I even did one of the preludes is 13/16 because it was the 13th prelude and I needed to do something different. So I just did 13/16, filled it in, and it worked out fine. But yeah, I guess, it's just been really fun exploring all that. And I think that as a composer, as a pianist, as a musician, generally, you're always learning, you're always growing, there's always more to explore. You're always coming into your own. It never stops. And it's a fun process.
It's so fascinating. And I wanted to ask because as I was listening, I felt like, particularly in the sonata, the opening movement, there was something about it that reminded me of Chopin's Etudes, particularly. I was thinking of Opus 10, number 12, the revolutionary
Cool.
Etude. So I was wondering if that was maybe whispering in your ear a little bit as you were composing. So hearing some of the different, I don't know, the fusion of influences, it's a good way to be, like lots of different kinds of music, I think.
Yeah.
But thinking about that 13th etude you mentioned, coming up with different ideas, How challenging was it to come up with 24 distinct ideas while still kind of keeping the larger picture?
You exactly hit it on the head. That was the challenge. It took some thinking. You can't just each piece, as you say, had to be different, and yet they had to kind of work together as a whole. So what's even more interesting is they weren't composed in order, which I don't know. I guess before I wrote that set, I would have thought, well, if you're going to write a set of pieces, like 24 pieces, you got to write them in order, right? But not necessarily. You can write them out of order as long as you can piece them together at the end. So some of the preludes are actually based on years old ideas that I never finished and I never fleshed out. I wrote them down, but it was like, I'll use this later at some point, right? And then a lot of them, most of them, were composed specifically with, okay, I'm going to write this set. I think the C minor prelude was actually the first that I wrote specifically for that set. So that was number 20, right? Not very much near the beginning. But yeah, it's sort of like, I don't know, you just kind of have to think on a small scale and on a large scale. So each individual prelude, you're really looking into structure. Structure is important for any piece, but particularly a short one because it's more pronounced. Like if it's too long or if it's too short, you're going to feel it because it's small enough that we can kind of get a full picture right there. So you have to watch that. No extra measures, no, it can't be too many, too few. It has to be exact. All right. And then, I think really though, the way that it worked for me is I was able to write a prelude, right? And then I would compare it to the prelude that came before and the one that came after. And if that worked, then that was good, right? And then the next one, I would compare it to before and then after, etc. So it was almost like I wasn't necessarily having to every moment think about the entire 24. Sometimes you can just think of a little subsection and see how that goes. And then, of course, you're thinking overall, but on those smaller scale, that can help. That can help a lot. I think I did that quite a bit.
Yeah. In terms of the structure, do you feel like you utilize some similar? I mean, I'm thinking about the prelude as a little bit of a slippery type of form because there's some flexibility as to how different composers might interpret that form. So, did you have a go-to, or you were just kind of like thinking on an individual basis as you went? How did that work?
Well, I like to joke when I was playing this in concerts a few seasons ago. I was joking with the audience and saying, well, we had Bach who wrote his 24 preludes and fugues, or 48, I guess, preludes and fugues for the Well-Tempered Clavier, and then you had Chopin do his set, and then Rachmaninoff did a set, Debussy did a set, Scriabin did a set, all these people did a set. So I said I'd like to join the club, right? In structure, in terms of how it's put together, it definitely echoes Chopin's approach because he did the circle of fifths, all the 24 major minor keys. And that's what I did. I liked the way that worked. I liked the idea of it being something you could sit through and listen to at once and kind of that arrangement. It just makes harmonic sense. Yeah.
What about the recording process itself? I had an opportunity to peruse some of the photos from your recording session at Skywalker Sound, and what was that like for you?
It was really quite amazing. I feel extremely fortunate that I had that opportunity to record my first album at a place like that. It's a wonderful studio with a wonderful crew. Leslie Ann Jones, she is a legend in her field, and everyone there is just the best at what they do. Really, it's the type of studio where you can get whatever sound you want. They just have it all there, and then you're working with the best type of people in the industry. I just feel like it was a great start. I'm really grateful that that was my first experience. It was a good one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, you didn't have an audience at the time of the recording, but you do now with the studio release. So, what would you say are your hopes for the audience experience?
Whenever I perform or create music, I always go back to this quote by Bach, J.S. Bach. He said that the first two goals, the primary goals of music, are to glorify God and to refresh the human spirit. Okay, and so for me, when people hear what I write or what I perform, I want them to be refreshed. I want them to experience that. I want it to speak to them, and I want it to be something that contributes something positive and encouraging to their lives.
Pianist and composer Talon Smith is a rising force in the classical world, and you can see why when you listen to his debut album of original music on Navona Records. Great to meet you, Talon. Thank you so much for your conversation.
Thank you, Mary. I really enjoyed it.